So is there actually a lot of lead, heavy metals in your protein powder? This is actually a video that I wanted to do last year when I ended up getting super busy with all kinds of other stuff when the story originally came out. And I'm bringing it up today because I have had, I would say, multiple people in the past week bring this up to me, which makes me think that the general public probably did not really understand the story as it broke. A few months ago, there was a Consumer Reports investigation that basically found that your protein powders, your health shakes, etc., all contain quote-unquote high levels of lead and other heavy metals, and that was obviously pretty concerning. Basically what they found is that pretty much every protein powder that they tested had more than they should, and one thing leads to another. However, I want to put this into the context that this is mostly fear-mongering. And the initial and immediate response that I saw was a lot of people pushing back on this. In particular, the test that they did, they took 23 different protein powders, they tested them, and they found that they had somewhere around, on average, 120% of the level of concern for lead. And they also found that protein powders that were plant-based rather than whey, which is obviously animal-based, did worse. Obviously, this raises a lot of alarm bells because a lot of people, take protein powder because it's pretty healthy. Protein powder is one of the most studied supplements that we have in existence, and it's been routinely found to be one of the healthiest things that you can consume simply because a lot of people are not getting enough protein, and so by eating enough protein, really positive health effects. Obviously, also when you are somebody who is looking to optimize athletic performance, somebody who is a bodybuilder, powerlifter, a lifter of any kind, you're looking to maximize your gains, obviously you need to be getting a lot more protein than the average person, and that can be hard to do by diet alone. So of course you take your protein shake because that makes it a super easy way to get in more protein. I will say that basically for me, I try to get most of my protein from, just home cooked meals, snacks throughout the day, but I'm very guilty of ending up, maybe 50 grams short at the end of the day, having to make a quick shake to get the rest of it in. That's pretty common for me, that's my use case. However, this is based exclusively on comparing it to the California Prop 65 threshold for lead. And for those of you who may not be aware, California tends to have stricter safety standards than a lot of other places, a lot of other states in the country, in the US. And this is why we get things like the fact that, in California, you have to put like a carcinogenic label on basically everything because they just have really low thresholds for, hey, this thing might cause cancer, slap it on the label. So it's kind of the same thing here. The threshold they have set is 0.5 microgram per day. The FDA's reference level is much, much higher. It ranges between, basically as low as like 2 micrograms per day for a pregnant woman to, like 10 plus, right? And these limits are already set with pretty big safety standards in mind. They're already set much lower than it really would be before you really start to see levels of serious toxicity. So again, we're looking at something that is essentially like 20 times lower than a number that is already set relatively low to prevent toxicity, which is not to say that having any amount of lead is necessarily good, but it is to say that it's a really, really small amount actually. Like they've set a very, very small limit here that they're testing against. So when you test against, hey, we have this extremely, extremely small limit, of course it's going to seem like everything has a ton of lead in it just because the number is so small. Saying that you have something like 120% of 0.5 microgram doesn't mean very much when, again, you're looking at 0.6 micrograms, and it might be more like 10 before you start to potentially see issues. The protein powders that were deemed the worst in this case did have pretty significant levels. So we're talking 7.7 and 6.3 micrograms of lead. So yes, that is starting to get a little bit concerning. However, this is also not accounting for the fact that it's pretty common to get a little bit of lead in basically everything else you eat, your normal food, your normal water, etc., which comprises about 5.3 micrograms of lead. So you're basically already getting 5.3 per day, which is already pretty close to the 6.3 to 7.7 that we're talking about is the concerning stuff for the, the worst offenders of the protein powders. So yes, is it bad if you are doubling that and suddenly you're pushing yourself up to, 12 plus? Okay, yeah, maybe. Maybe that might be starting to be a concern. But again, we're talking about levels that are still very, very low, set very, very low intentionally, relative to things that will actually cause poisoning or serious health effects. I think where this could be a problem is if you start to overuse these products, right? So I think that there's a very common sort of joke that goes on in the if it fits your macros / macro-based dieting sort of community, which is, okay, if all that matters is meeting my macros, then why don't I just get all of my protein from protein shakes? Why don't I just get all of my carbs from, sugar and all of my fats from olive oil, and then I'm good to go, or something along those lines? Well, I mean, no one's recommending that. Generally, you should be eating a broad variety of foods. You should be getting your nutrients in from a variety of sources so that you're making sure that you're minimizing the risk that you're missing out on important micronutrients. And of course, it's just generally not healthy to get all of your food from a very small number of food sources. So you could imagine a situation where somebody is getting a crap ton of their protein from protein shakes alone, and that might be an issue if you're basically just chugging protein shakes all day, every single day. However, I mean, you could say that about all kinds of food, right? You could say that about virtually anything. I saw this thing about a guy who just ate nothing but sardines for a long time and his blood type changed or something. Eating a crap ton of any one food is probably going to cause issues regardless. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is, whether it's protein powder or anything. What I do think is a problem is that some of these are products that are not necessarily just strictly normal protein shakes. So some of these are products that are mass gainers or meal replacement shakes. So a mass gainer is essentially a protein shake that is mixed with other stuff. So basically you're mixing a protein shake with, some additional carbs. And the idea there is that you are somebody who wants to bulk up. So you are trying to, have a really easy, convenient way to get a lot of calories at once. So you're basically just combining a protein powder with additional calories so that you can get in a crap ton of calories very quickly. I've experimented with them in the past. I don't like them. They're not fun on the digestion. I used to literally, I would go to the gym, I would make a blender-sized mass gainer shake, I would drink the whole thing, and the whole thing would put me in such a food coma that I would basically pass out for a half hour. I'd have terrible digestion for a while, and then, finally it would kind of start to pass, and then I'd actually be able to go back to my normal life, right? Not a fun experience. I don't really recommend mass gainers because I don't think they're necessarily a healthy approach for a lot of people. But mass gainers are intended to take up a relatively large number of calories in your diet. So again, you're intended to be going through a lot of it all at once, right? And then the same thing with meal replacement shakes. So Huel, a common meal replacement shake, was another one that ranked highly on this list, right? And Huel is intended to be a meal replacement shake, meaning that it's, again, intended to actually take up more of your diet. It's not intended to strictly be a little supplement on the side. You are supposed to replace entire meals with this, and, ideally multiple meals. And these meal replacement shakes are intended to be more nutritionally complete. The whole idea is that it's basically, protein, carbs, fats, sort of everything mixed together. And you've also got your micronutrients covered as well, so you're not risking malnutrition. So the idea is that this could be something that you use to replace multiple meals or to take up a relatively large percentage of your day, especially for people who are, busy people who, don't have a ton of time to prepare food or whatever. So again, this could be a serious issue if you're going through a lot of this stuff, and you are going through a lot of this stuff every single day. And of course, there are also just some general caveats, which is that, when you're testing anything, sometimes there's going to be more or less than the average in the sample. You might get one protein shake that has no lead in it and one that has, more than average. It's all very random because, that's how these things work. And again, it's also pretty normal that you're going to have just a lot of lead in your ordinary food. You're going to have all kinds of heavy metals, little trace amounts. That is just a normal thing that comes with being alive, is that lots of your food has lots of little bits of stuff in it that, is not necessarily concerning, but it's there, and it's maybe concerning if it becomes an issue if you have a lot of something. So while this is something that you should potentially be concerned about or that you should be wary of, I would say that the average person probably has little to no worry when it comes to actual protein shakes in the way that they are commonly used, which is again as a supplement, not an all the time food. So long as you are having your protein shakes periodically as a way to supplement when you're not getting enough protein, so long as you're getting most of your protein from whole food sources, home cooked meals, etc., you're probably fine. And so long as you're also not, just chugging a ton of it, so long as you're not eating a ton of other stuff that also happens to have a bunch of lead, you're probably fine. If you are a tiny little baby or you're like a pregnant woman, then you have to be more concerned, right? Obviously, at that point, be a little bit more concerned about lead when you are more susceptible to that kind of thing. But when you are a healthy, growing adult, when you are a relatively fit individual who's exercising and looking to optimize their strength and their muscle mass, these are probably not concerns. And another little aside, I do remember way back in yon olden days, how bad it used to be with advertising. So back when I was a teenager, 20 years ago, you would get these ads from these bodybuilders, and basically they would always say, hey, the secret to my being jacked as hell is the protein powder that I use, and they'd have some kind of, branded deal where they, do, promotion for whatever the specific protein powder is. And they would say it was all the protein powder when obviously like 80% of it was just the steroids, right? They're just on a crap ton of steroids. But they would also say things where they would be like, oh, in order to optimally build muscle mass to look like me, you need to be consuming insane amounts of protein. They would say values as high as, I would see, 2 to 3 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. Now, if you take me, let's say 200 pounds, let's say 3 grams of protein per pound of body weight, that's 600 grams. Multiply that by 4, that is 2,400 calories. My daily diet, I consume about 3,500 calories. That means that probably like 2/3 of my diet should be protein, if I'm following this guideline. That's insane. It's not true. What we found in the research nowadays is that the actual amount of protein you need from most people is probably closer to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight per day, up to 1 gram per pound of body weight, maybe a little bit higher, maybe 1.1, 1.2, if you are looking to optimize your performance and really squeeze out every possible additional amount of muscle mass, additional amount of performance and recovery, right? The problem here is that you can tell why they were making such big recommendations is because A, they're basically impossible. Nobody will really be able to adhere to that. B, that makes it very easy to be like, oh, if you don't look like me, it's because you weren't following the rules. And C, obviously, the only possible theoretical way anyone is going to get anywhere near those values is by chugging down protein shakes all day. And you can tell why they are saying it like that, and the answer is because they are trying to sell protein shakes. And so, taking that with a grain of salt, I mean, I used to see so much stuff where it'd be like, it's like, hey, what's your training routine and your diet plan? And it's like, okay, my training routine is, I wake up at 6 a.m., I have a protein shake. I train, I have another protein shake. I take a nap, I have another protein shake. Maybe I snack on some nuts or something, and then I have another protein shake. And I do my evening training, and then I have another protein shake. And then before bed, I definitely have a protein shake. It's like you'd get these meal plans that were just like, what are you talking about? You're saying you had like 10 protein shakes today or whatever. I don't really think that's necessarily true either. But that's the kind of stuff people used to say. And it's like, if you were eating like that, maybe that's a problem for the amount of lead in your protein shake, right? I think the average person nowadays, nowhere near that, doesn't need to worry about that. Not a concern, should never worry about it. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully this has been interesting. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell, comment down below, let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Have a good week. I'll talk to you all next week. Have a good one.